Okay. All right, I'm gonna go in the hall.
Yeah, DARTEP. I'm supposed to be at, yeah.
I'm in your Zoom. Let me get- click. Let me get out of here. Set this together.
Join us remotely. We have somebody monitoring. So if you have any questions or concerns or comments, go ahead and chime in. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Boulay. He is the Dean of the College of Education and Human.
Good morning. Good morning. On behalf of the faculty and staff of the College of Education and Human Development at Western Michigan University, we would like to welcome you to our beautiful university, and then under today's frigid weather, right? So many of you actually took the courage, and because of your dedication and commitment to improving the quality of education in the great state of Michigan. So I really, you should pat your own back for coming to the meeting. And so, of course, we are also pleased to have the opportunity to host such a meeting, and also meet many of you. I have believed that I just share with my colleagues. In fact, no shame to say that this is my first DARTEP meeting. Because again, in the state of Michigan, there are 3 different groups are related to teacher education, teacher preparation. There's a Dean's group, there's a MACD, and this is a DARTEP. So we have purposefully, because of the limited personnel and resources, so we say the deans go to the deans, my associate dean go to the MACD, and all my directors go to the DARTEPs. Right? That's the reason. Let me share with you some information about our college and our university, and look at the history of our teacher education program. We have existed almost more than a century. Our college, in fact, has the longest celebrated history among all the colleges at Western Michigan University. And our roots actually can be traced back when the university was called Michigan State Normal School in 1903. So basically that's the predecessor of WMU. Teacher preparation and training, as a result, we can say that is in the DNA of our university and also in our college, with a strong heritage of high quality teacher preparation. We're committed to continuing this great tradition. So let me also share with you some of the information about our college. In fact, in the folder, you can see some of the information about the by numbers of our college. So our college is a vibrant academic unit with 6 academic departments. Right? So I think that we're not only just education, but also we include programs in the area we call human development. So we have 6 departments, including counselor, education, and counseling psych. We have educational leadership, research, and technology department. We also have program, the traditional teacher preparation program, like teaching, learning, educational studies, special education literacies, and also we have 2 programs that if you only have teacher preparation program in your college, you probably don't have those. We call it family consumer sciences, and also human performance and health education, including programs such as dietetics, fashion, merchandising, interior design, and human performance. We have sport management, we have coaching, sport performance, and a lot of human development programs. So collectively, the college offers a diverse, wide range of academic programs, including 36 baccalaureate program, undergraduate programs, 33 master programs, and 9 doctoral programs. And so we have students in the college. We have about 2,100 undergraduate students and more than 1,400 graduate students. We prepare exceptional professionals in education and human development fields. Our vision, let me share some information about our vision. The reason I want to talk about this because it's related to some of the initiatives we are currently working to address some of the priorities related to teacher education program. So our vision is to be the premier choice for diverse community of education and human development learners by offering a portfolio of regionally, nationally, and internationally recognized program. To achieve this vision, we have been working very hard on a number of priorities. And so allow me to take a few minutes to talk about those priorities and look at how teacher preparation related initiatives fit into those priorities. The first priority is to develop and maintain a suite of programs that are high quality, innovative, forward-looking, and trend-setting. This priority basically centers around quality, and it related to our university's priority on school of choice. For this priority, over the last year, we are working very diligently on our accreditation self-study report to be submitted by the end of March. You can ask Marcia how stressful she is. All right, so in the next month, and so we need to put together a big self-study. So for those institutions, you have done yours, right? You know how the volume works, right? So, and gratefully, we have a leader like Marcia, and also a competent group of faculty and staff working with her to put together such a document. And also, we're preparing for the upcoming site visit in December this year, and look forward to welcoming some of the It's better? Okay. And so certainly welcome any institutions you are waiting in line for your site visit, and you're welcome to come to observe for the site visit. We also completed the curriculum revision to our undergraduate secondary education program and making it a graduate certificate program leading to a licensure. The revision, in fact, is in response to changes in the field of teacher preparation that calls for strong content preparation, more experiences working with students in schools, and an opportunity to participate in a full year internship. And so that is something that we have been working very hard to address. The first priority on quality. The second priority is to uphold the position and promote our college as a vital and impactful contributor to our university and to the broader community we serve. This priority is about impactfulness. To address this priority, we have collaborated with a lot of school districts. Let me share one example of what we have done to be impactful. We have collaborated with the Lakeview School District to offer a teaching residence program. The school district, in fact, interviewed it and selected 8 students to the program for fall 2018. And each student received $4,000 for their teaching internship. We also have developed a partnership with Benton Harbor area schools. We're working on a number of initiatives to enhance the partnership, including provision of mentorship to their new teachers and offering a cohort program in special education in Southwest Michigan starting this summer. We're in the process of recruiting students to this cohort program. The third priority of our college is to stabilize our enrollment. Like many of our colleges, universities in the state of Michigan, we all have been experiencing some challenges in this area. So this priority focuses on enrollment and is pertaining to our university's priority on student success. For the third priority on enrollment, we have entered an articulation agreement with MDE, like many of you have done, on accepting high school CTE credits, and developed a process on credit evaluation and acceptance. We also established a faculty and staff task force to determine how to use a competence-based education model in evaluating prospective students' prior experiences and accordingly award credit to them. So in terms of enrollment, through the conscious efforts of our faculty and students, we have seen some exciting, encouraging outcomes. Our graduate enrollment has been up consecutively for 4 years since fall 2014, right? So we have many institutions have seen some decline in graduate enrollment continuously, but we have done some innovative work so that our graduate enrollment, in fact, up 4 years in a row. And let me just share one of the examples we have is that I want to talk about our faculty in literacy studies. And so 4 years ago, our literacy program, we only have about 40 students. Today, we have 120 students because they went out to offer a cohort-based literacy program and working with school district and with our university to provide scholarship to teachers. That's how we get our enrollment up. So thank you for allowing me to share some information with you about our college, about some of the priorities we have and the initiatives we have been taking. And so again, WNU's teacher education program is poised to continue its tradition and of success in preparing teachers for the great state of Michigan and beyond. So thank you for coming to our university and enjoy the meeting. Thank you.
Welcome. I'm going to talk just about some great little logistics here. If you haven't already discovered it, WNU Guest is how you can log in, and there's no password needed. That's as of today. Last week, we would have had to have looked up a password and posted it somewhere for you, but as of today, the university got tired of changing the password every month, and so we've been getting notices of as of February 1st, and it's working for most of you. There's a few of you that are struggling to get in, and we'll keep working on that. I think most of you found the restrooms when you came in. There's also a Coke room down that way. There are beverages, snacks in the back, and a cooler with pop in it like that. If you need anything, let us know. Welcome. Thank you for driving through all of this. Yes, we know that whenever you get about to Galesburg, there's always going to be problems. That's just when you travel 94, you learn that. But our university was closed yesterday and the day before. We closed for a half a day on Monday, much to the dismay of our students, and you may have seen it in the news. We did not close on Tuesday until 5 o'clock. Our students were not happy, and most of our local schools are out today. So as somebody said earlier, pat yourself on the back, you're here, and last time I checked, we've got about 56 to 60 people that are also logged in.
62?
62 now. So we've got a good size here, but welcome. If you have any questions, please let us know. I also really want to put out a quick thank you to Amy Burns. You saw her when you came in, and the Dean's Office staff for helping to set all of this up. Jen Hayboss for coming to my office and saying, can we host this? And I said, sure. Now let's figure out how to do it. And the staff at the Fetzer Center, who you will see coming in and out all day and helping us. So thank you very much. Let us know if you've got any questions. Welcome.
Right-hand slide.
Good morning to everyone. Oh, no, that's too dry. Good morning. Much better. Good morning. Okay. At our November 30th meeting at Wayne State University, I recorded a fund balance of $10,105.83. Services to host a meeting at Wayne State cost DARTEP $2,821.86. Since our November meeting, we had no additional deposits. So today I'm reporting a fund balance of $7,283.97. Pretty short and quick to the point. Obviously, the cost for today's meeting is still pending. We'll report those totals to you when we convene at our next meeting. Since there were no additional dues paid, EPI totals remained at 31, and membership also remained at 139. As usual, any questions, you can feel free to email me directly or contact my assistant, Sonia Landrum. That being said, we want to thank Western Michigan University's College of Education and Human Services for hosting today's meeting. Any questions? Good. Thank you so much.
That one. Close. Hold on a second. That was our rolling slide. We have the whole slideshow right here. It's not as nice to look at as the last thing, but there you go.
Kevin, I'd like to thank you very much for all you've done for us and announce that here at DARTEP, Kevin has decided to retire. We want to thank him very much for the years of service that he's given us. We're very happy for you.
Thank you.
All right, now it was really tough for a lot of you to get here. I know the snow was really bad in a lot of locations in Michigan. So let's go through and see if there's anybody here to do reports. Michigan Association of Colleges and Teacher Education, which is MACD. All right, we're here. Nice. All right.
First, we had a meeting on November 9th. It was another beautiful, blustery day. And a few rugged people made it to Saginaw Valley State University, where we had a chance to talk to Tim Kelly and Adam Zemke, both now term limited out House members, who gave us their perspective. And in particular, this was important with respect to the Garcia bill package, which I'm sure MDE will talk about in a minute, so I won't say anymore, but we're very happy. And so that was very interesting. And so I have the answer to solve all education programs because Tim Kelly shared it. So I will share it with you right now, and I am not exaggerating. Get rid of unions, teach phonics, have vouchers, and have a Catholic school on every corner. So if you we can go home now. And anyway, so that you can imagine the excitement on that meeting. So please start coming to our meetings. The next meeting, if anyone's going to AACTE here, we will be meeting on February 23rd from 5:30 to 6:30 for Frivolity. And so you're welcome to come by. I want to put a plug out there for the retreat that we have at Northern Michigan. Has anyone here been to that retreat? All right, so turn to the person next to you that didn't raise your hand and tell them how much fun you had at the break, because it really is a wonderful opportunity to do the work that we love to do. It isn't about listening to people like me talking at you, it's actual work being done. So that's really fun. So I encourage you to consider, at least your institution should have representation, because it is a wonderful opportunity to really impact some of the practice things that are going on at the state. The white paper that I call the manifesto against the PRE was created there. Some of the other work we've done with respect to, I can't keep all the work. There's always little work projects that people are engaged in, and I'm sure there'll be discussions of grade banding and core practices and all that fun stuff. And the dates are June 10th through the 12th. June 10th through the 12th. Thank you for, it's on my notes. You do not have to be an AACTE member to join MACD. I repeat, you do not have to be an AACTE member to join MACD. So if your institution's been holding back because you thought that was required, email me and I'll set you up. And I think that's all. Yes, are there any questions? Anything anyone else needs to add? Going once, going twice? All right, I'm in the back all day, so if you have any additional questions, please feel free to ask.
Anyone here from Wait?
There was an email sent. Check your email.
Check your email. Michigan Public Deeds Council. And our independent organization, no one's here from that, I don't think. And COAT.
There is no report from COAT.
Thank you. No report from COAT. Deb?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Doug Brashler. I'm the Accreditation Director at Hope College and in charge of the Hope Accreditation Conference coming up in April. I sent out an email yesterday giving you some information about the conference, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that was put in that email. First of all, on the DARTEP website, if you look at that website, you'll notice that it says that it's the Hope Cape Conference, and we don't want to be called that anymore. We want to be called the Accreditation Conference focused on continuous improvement. We don't want to pigeonhole ourselves into just looking at CAPE initiatives. And if you look at the email that I sent on Wednesday, the whole focus will be about accreditation. We are going to have a couple of different roundtables. In the backward design model, we're going to have some superintendents from ISDs and local school districts. We want to hear from them. We want to hear what we do well, what we could do better, and we're hoping that we can encourage you to send me some questions that you would have of this particular group. We're still working on finalizing the third person, but I can tell you that two of the people, Pete Haynes is the Ottawa area ISD superintendent and has been very active on Capitol Hill, talking and working with legislators on the same Garcia package and the like. And Christy Gibson is the assistant superintendent at East Point Schools in Detroit. We are still working on a third one and need some confirmation, but we're still working there. Also on Wednesday, you will notice in that email that we're going to talk about the CAPE Advanced Standards. So we're going to do a little bit of CAPE work there. But we will also have the second roundtable of people who have recently gone through the visit. I want you to know that my visit is 2 weeks away. And yes, I had hair before this whole process started. We're going to talk about addendum writing, rejoinder writing. So there's going to be accreditation work on that Wednesday, April 10th. On Thursday, the 11th, we're really going to turn our focus to some of the things that you're going to hear about today, all things Michigan specific, things that we're working on here. Things like, there was a screen up here when we walked in, did you know screen? And the 3 pieces of search structure, core practices, clinical experiences we're really going to dive into that. And I think it's a precursor to what we will do that you heard from Beth up at Northern Michigan University as we work through it. So some nice continuity with that whole thing. Look for an email from me next week with hotel and conference information. I will tell you that the conference had to go up just slightly. Cost for the conference for 2 days will be $100. And for if you can only attend one day or the other, it will be $80. And then hotel information, the Hayworth Inn is offering rooms at a group rate of $105, which is pretty good. And then just across the street, 8th Street in Holland is the Marriott, and they have a group rate of $160. So all of that information is coming your way early next week. Thank you very much. Any questions? Send me questions. Oh, I forgot one other thing, sorry. We will have video conferences with both Vince O'Neill, the Cape liaison for Michigan, and Mark Lascelles Peterson from AQUEP. And again, we're hoping that you can send us some questions and that we can get them to prepare ahead of time. Okay? Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. All right, MDE.
Oh, yes, definitely. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I understand there was a comment on line not being able to read the print on our slides. We do have, I made a PDF of these slides, which could be sent out to, but it's also on the website, DARTEP website. So if you want to pull that down and go from there, then you'll be able to do that. First, I'd like to say thank you, Western, for hosting us here today, and then do a brief faces in the room among my MDE colleagues. So these should all be familiar faces, except one, which we will happily introduce. So we have our director, Leah Green, our assistant director, Sarah Kate Levan, consultant Gina Garner, consultant Kelly Cassidy, myself, and manager for prep unit, Sean Kodke, and introducing our newest consultant, Darcy McMahon. I'm going to have her say a few words about herself, and she's going to be our math and science consultant in our prep unit. So here you go, Darcy.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here with you all this morning. And Sean just told you everything I was going to tell you about myself. So I'm happy to be here supporting science and math and alternative route programs, CTE, those sorts of things. My most recent stop was at CMU before here and in their Math and Science Center as a program director. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right. Stephanie Whiteside should be joining us later for the job likes and the certification officers. And then we have other MDE people online. Kate Boswell Gallagher is online. She's working, she's our head research consultant who's leading up the EPI performance score revision. So if you want to send her a private message via the chat or question, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer it. All right. First bit of update, we also had State Board of Education changes here in 2019. Richard Ziley and Eileen Weiser concluded their service on board. We have two new members, Judy Pritchett and Tiffany Tilley. So we have two for party affiliation, two Republican exiting and two Democrats taking their place. That gives us a 6-2 Democrat majority on the board. At the January meeting, they also elected new officers. Cassandra Ulbrich is now the president of the board. She was serving previously as co-president with Dr. Ziley. Pamela Pugh is our vice president. Michelle Fecteau, the secretary. Tom McMillan is the treasurer, and Tiffany Tilley is the NASB delegate. And you'll see from here on out, your approval letters will have all of that information in the footer. So if you're wondering what all that is, that's our board. All right, I invite Leah to come up and give you some, I think, very good news, or news you'll like on legislative updates.
So as Beth mentioned, the Garcia package did not pass. We had a lot of kind of lame duck conversations with the legislature. There was also a bill that was to eliminate the reading diagnostics. This was in competition with several other bills that were intended to increase reading requirements in preparation. So the reading diagnostics elimination did not pass as well. We had also been working with the legislature. There was an increase to student growth percentages in the educator evaluation process to 40%. We were hoping to not get the increase, to leave it at this current percent, which I think is 25%. And unfortunately, we were not successful in that last minute change of all of them. I was hoping that would go through. So it is currently at 40%. We're going to, as soon as the freshmen are comfortable in their positions, we're going to head back and see if we can work on an amendment to an existing bill to reduce the student growth percentage again in evaluation. The student teaching background check did not pass. I did get a newly drafted bill that is not dropped yet that is still looking to put background checks in place for student teaching. So we're working on some language around that. And the expansion to TRSP for 3-year-olds did not pass. Things that did pass, allowing for 60 credits for substitute teachers, or an industrial technology or CTE program, allowing for a high school diploma with a professional license. So essentially this practice was allowable with some current adjustments, but it is requiring us to rewrite some of the implementation of this and create kind of a new CTE setting permit. So we're working on that internally. I don't think it has as big of an impact to the field as the legislators thought it did, but that's okay. We did successfully, a couple of bills ago, there had been an age restriction implemented for subbing, which was going to cause problems for some of your student teachers who wanted to sub. That age restriction was removed, so that was good news. Probably all of you have heard about House Bill 5526, reestablishing the A to F grading system. MDE has been very public about this and does not support an A to F grading system, and this will put us back where we were several years ago. So we are less than enthusiastic about this change and have been very vocal about it. I don't think it's getting us anywhere, but that's the platform. And the school safety package passed legislation. This has more to do with K-12 school safety initiatives than it does with teacher prep initiatives, which you may see coming forward in the future, some changes around criminal convictions for our educators. But it did require specific practices to keep our students safe, which is always good. Okay, so right now, interestingly, there is a bill out, House Bill 4504, around school counselors, and it would require districts to employ one counselor for every 450 students. So we brought this today because this was interesting. I immediately started walking around saying, well, we don't even have enough counselors to fulfill this. And then I thought maybe I should actually run the data and see before I start saying things that may or may not be true. As it turns out, when we look at active school counselors, and we use the zip code that they are living in, and you see the first 3 digits of the zip code they're currently living in as recorded in our online certification system, which may or may not be accurate. Of course, it has its limitations. We do, when people log in, we do redirect them to update their contact information, which includes their current address, however, and since they do have active certificates, they've done that in the recent past. The first column shows you zip code, where they're living. The second column shows you the number of certified school counselors that we have reported living in that zip code in relation to the number of students that would be in that zip code. And then it shows you what's currently employed in that zip code of school counselors compared to students. So it's kind of interesting. So in theory, we have enough school counselors to employ them 1 to 450 everywhere, but in 2 zip codes, which was not what I expected at all, actually. And these are active school counselor certificates.
For a whole bunch more zip codes after that we cut off to just show this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
Those
So,
are the only 2.
Yep, okay, thank you. So Kelly, who helped with the data, said there are a whole bunch more zip codes that we cut off, but the only 2 that didn't meet the ratio are you see included here, highlighted in yellow. Those 2 zip codes are the Detroit area and Genesee area, if you were wondering, because that was my immediate next question. So even in the UP zip codes, in theory, there were enough school counselors with active school counselor endorsements or licenses living there to meet the ratio of 1 to 450. We have not shared this with the legislature because we still don't think this is a good idea for multiple reasons. One, because many of those people may be choosing not to be employed, and so they're not actually available for employment. We were actually running the data to hope to give them the opposite, that there are definitely not enough people, so you shouldn't do this. What we found was that, well, I guess there are enough people, so we're just gonna hold on to it and not give it to anybody, but we thought we'd share it with you from an interesting perspective. Oops. Okay, so that's it for legislative updates. Some of you, I don't know how many of you know, they're the new director I don't know his official title, legislative liaison, legislative director under Governor Gretchen Whitmer came out of Wayne State University. So thank you to Wayne State for lending this wonderful person on back to us for the new role as legislative liaison. This is somebody that we have a good relationship with, so we're excited. I think we'll be able to work very closely with the legislature and the new governor moving forward on initiatives. Good news for all of us. Okay. Oh, I was doing this one too.
Yeah.
All right. I just realized because you didn't move.
No.
So we wanted to share with you a video. As some of you know, because you're intimately involved in this project, the Department of Education has a partnership with REL Midwest and AIR, and they have named this initiative the Michigan Alliance to Improve Teacher Preparation. It involves higher education and K-12 representatives. There are a number of initiatives that we are working on, one of which is this initiative to ensure that our K-12 partners and our higher ed partners all have the same expectations of what our teacher candidates should look like as they're exiting their programs and entering the field. You may have heard me say before, I don't think we're all on the same page when K-12 says our teachers aren't prepared and our higher education institutions say our teachers are prepared. I think there's a disconnect in what we all are defining as prepared and in what areas. So part of the initiative is to bridge that gap, and REL developed a little video based on one of the meetings that we had around this work, and we wanted to share that with you today. And there's also on YouTube where you'll find, if you go back and you look at this presentation, there are other links about the initiatives that they're doing, including a recent one that partnered with which higher education institution? Remind me, are you here? Did I miss you? No. About ELL students in the Detroit area. Pardon me, is it Wayne State? I don't remember. I'm so sorry. I was even there during the big debut and I can't remember, but it was a really good program on our ESL students, how they're adapting, how many there are, about their communities, how we are all supporting them as partners. So I would encourage you to check that out. If this works.
It does not, the link is there also.
Oh, okay.
You can have That's why.
Quite often, and it's really shocking that this particular education doesn't spend more time doing what we're doing today, which is that critical conversation piece.
Teacher prep and K through 12, while they have the same goal of helping new teachers succeed and keep teaching, often are not connected to one another, and that's why we're here today.
And so today we'll have leaders of K-12 education and leaders from our educator prep institutions coming together to talk about particular models that they've been putting into place and partnerships they have with K-12 districts and higher ed, and what might be scalable in the state of Michigan to address some of these shortages and shortfalls in the teacher supply. Today's event is really the brainchild of our champion of our alliance, the Midwest Alliance to Improve Teacher Prep, who works for the Michigan Department of Education. And her goal overall of the alliance was if we could bring the two voices of K-12 education in the state and higher education, particularly educator prep institutions, together to talk about what are the needs of the state in terms of teacher preparation, what are the expectations that K-12 have of teacher prep programs, and bring those two entities together to work together to find solutions to growing shortages of teachers, very high turnover of teachers in our districts. So hopefully today will be the first start in building that bridge between K-12 and higher ed to provide not only a high quality teaching force in the future, but also supporting that workforce so they stay in the profession.
Michigan Department of Education is very interested in bringing people together to have conversations that are critical to education. And so anyone in the education community and engaging in dialogue together.
I decided, because of my past experience of being an administrator and working with young teachers, I decided to create a coaching cohort of recent graduates. So I offered to all 2018 graduates of my institution an opportunity to have an instructional coach, free of charge, no questions asked, no evaluations, and just let's talk education and let's talk problems of practice that you have as a first-year teacher.
So some of the changes that we've been making at Grand Valley State University have much to do with ensuring that our candidates are ready for teaching. On day one, although we know that they still have a lot of growth and development to do as teachers are beginning their career. But we are trying to be very, very deliberate about choosing some competencies that are critically important for beginner teachers, some practices in particular, and ensuring that we embed those practices throughout their programs. So we're moving beyond talking about teaching and into actually ensuring that candidates can do the work of teachers. We've been very fortunate at Grand Valley to work with some strong partners in the K-12 arena who have just helped us think about how we needed to reform or change our program.
We need higher ed educators coming into the K-12 setting and spending time and seeing best practices and instruction. And then our teachers have to go into that higher ed setting and have conversations with the young people that are coming into the profession, giving feedback to the professors, and we have to do a better job with collaboration, all for the same purpose, and that's to create the best educators that we possibly can and the biggest passion that we possibly can for our young people coming into the profession.
So one of the good things that I learned today was some of the work that's happening at K-12 around dispositions and the higher leverage practices, and trying to make sure that students not only have some of the content-based skills, but also some of the soft skills, whether it's perseverance, grit, understanding and building relationships, and developing that why to bringing their passion forward, and how that continues to drive them to want to help kids.
The most encouraging thing I think I heard today was the idea that college prep courses and the universities are looking at not only content area and instructional practices, but also the person as a whole coming into education and skills beyond just their technical skills and book smart. One of the things that I will take from today is the importance of my role as principal and shaping the culture of our school and the effects that has on teacher retention. The other thing I plan to do is reach out to some different universities and offer our school and our space as a place for teachers to come and learn.
is like hosting the Oscars because I saw all those clips and then I see your faces out in the audience. But I don't have tiny gold statues for you, sorry. All right. Moving right along, this is some information that is in our written update, and we had planned to have Rebecca Emmerling, our manager for our Ed Eval unit, here to present on this and review this, but it is in the written update on our student growth workshops that are coming up, one very quickly in February, and then later in July and August. So if you have this PowerPoint, those links are live. Those links should also be in the written update, so you can go from there. If you have any questions about these that you'd like us to take back to Rebecca and her unit, please feel free to jot them down on the pad paper that each of you have in your folders, or email to any of us, and we can make sure those get sent. Yeah. Then there are also Ed Eval webinars, again, future and past education, educator evaluation webinars coming up. There are several of them. She notes registration will be available soon. Coming up, one in February, March, April, and May. Again, the link is live in the PowerPoint, so you can get more information. And again, we're happy to address any or take questions back to Rebecca's unit. Our office has been working with doing webinars on student growth percentiles and the EBOS, value added state assessment student growth data for use in educator evaluations. And some recorded sessions on that will be publicly available soon. Brian Lloyd, who has presented at previous DARTEPs, works in Rebecca's unit, and he's heading that up. He is stranded in North Carolina because of weather and flights and things like that. So he can address questions on that again via email, or we can get back to him. All right, Kelly.
Quick question, where is the student growth workshop?
Just online webinars? Do you know?
They're held at different areas throughout the city, but then there are also webinars, and then they're recorded and posted as well. So anyone's location. There's a link.
Yes, these are links. They'll give you. I'm afraid that never get there.
Yeah.
So if somebody else wants to do that. So for certification structure, I'm not going to talk about the diagram again. If you are new and are not familiar with it and are kind of panicking at that, please find me later today and we can talk all about it. What we do know is that the elementary standards were passed by the board in November, and we're working through the timeline for implementation. As promised, this fall this winter, we will have webinars. We're working through creating the content for those and working with the people who will be hosting them. So we have a couple more months before winter ends, and it has definitely reminded us that it's here. We will also be working with the content conferences. So we're actually going to develop in partnership with some of our standards developers and with CMU a faculty conference for the literacy section. And then we will also be having a presentation at the AMTE conference in March. So those things are both in the works. This timeline has not changed. It's the same one I threw up last time. It is the same one that is in the written update. So anybody who is ready through it, you can stop. It's all already written down. We are seeking volunteers for the test development for these standards and any other standards. This is the same link all the time. So if you want to have faculty go ahead and put their name right now while they're thinking about it for future standards, or if they want to volunteer for the PK3 or 3.6, we are looking for people for those. Please know that right now the volunteer page is kind of funny with it'll have middle grades and secondary math. So we're working on fixing that to be clearer about what they're volunteering for, but putting in some sort of combination of those will let us know the So we do have groups working on the 5, 9, and 7, 12 standards. Our groups are ELA, math, and the professional set. They are working through the current set and they're reviewing some national standards and trying to make sure that they fit the Michigan context. They do, all 3 of those groups are right now projected to have a draft for review by external experts by March of 2019. If you have people that you think would be good for that review team, we will happily take names for those review teams. And then based on that timeline, we'll take that feedback back. Committees will review the feedback, incorporate that into the draft, and we're expecting to present to the board in late summer of 2019 with adoption in fall of 2019. So this would put it on about a year back timeline from the elementary. Also working right now is the ZS endorsement. There's a group that is revisiting those standards in light of the PK3 and how many of the ZS standards were actually lifted into the PK3. So they're thinking about what is the future for this endorsement. That group has met 1 time so far, and they're looking at the possibility of it operating as another section of the grade band to add like a 5 picture. Thinking about it could be paired with a PK3 or it could stand alone. If you have questions about that, please ask me. We are working with the Office of Great Start. Richard Lauer is working on that group and managing that, and we're providing support with how the process kind of works. They will also have a review team and are projected for review in March. So part of that, please let us know. Questions about that?
We also have built into the agenda today after lunch and Java Lights breakout sessions and MDE Q&A. So as questions develop, we may go there. So in the interest of time, we can move through some of the information agenda. Many of you have MTTC development questions. These came out of a DARTEP listserv conversation about the pass rates on the social studies test. Donnie Utakis from Evaluation Systems Pearson will be with us in April to give you the full picture of the development process. They're also in the process of creating more public documentation of that for dissemination through their website. If you've seen, there's a very small faculty guide on the website that does have some details on how the tests are developed and implemented and how faculty can help with supporting candidate performance. That's being completely rewritten and putting in more details on the steps involved in the test development process. So stay tuned. Kate Boswell Gallagher has been working on leading up our EPI score redesign work. Committee meetings are currently underway. We anticipate the main thrust of the work will wrap up here in March. Targeting 2019-20 academic year for piloting this revised score. For this year, 18-19, we're internally monitoring those institutions that have been labeled at risk and low performing. And so if you haven't heard from us about your institution of being low performing or at risk, good news, you're not, okay? We're working with those teams. The framework that is guiding this is what's called the Key Effectiveness Indicators Framework. And so what the committee has been doing is going through these different areas in which you could review teacher effectiveness, candidate selection and completion, knowledge and skills for teaching, performance as classroom teachers, and contribution to state needs. They have also developed a 5th category of quality assurance systems that we would have some indicators for. Now, some of these indicators are not necessarily things that generate points that determine that you are low performing or at risk or in an individual institution, but rather dashboard information that we would hope can help the annual reporting that institutions are obligated to do for Title II and streamline some of that, but provide some robust information for your continuous improvement. We'll have more on that. Part of this is our survey development committee. We're convening an advisory board to map out a process for redesigning that have been part of our performance score. Looking to redevelop the current 4 surveys and add a principal survey. Expectations and standards. The development committee will start up in May and June of May and June of 2019. If you're interested in helping out with testing survey items as we develop them, please send me an email. Very interested in future candidates to pilot and test that's the first one that will get developed. And we would really love it to have teacher candidates who take the current teacher candidate survey at the end of this semester. Also, user test a new survey. So we can data on it and make sure things work well. All right, the next thing on our agenda, and last, is the teacher location report, and Leah will come up for that. There's a link here to Epic at Michigan State University that has this full report and other goodies, I believe, as I clicked through and found it.
Yeah, we just wanted to make sure that you were aware of a couple of things. One is that we have a partnership with some partners called Epic, and now I can't even tell you what Epic stands for. But they are using our in-house data, both our data that's in MOEX, so our credentialing data, and our data that's housed in REP, which is our educator workforce kind of employment and placement data. And they are doing a bunch of research for us. And they're on this link, as Sean mentioned, there are several data reports posted, and over time we're going to be developing PowerPoint content out of those research papers for you all to review and use with your people. So we pulled, Kelly, actually, thank you, Kelly, pulled some things out of one of the reports for us to look at today that I thought would pique your interest and get you to look for the link out. And that is, one of the studies was a teacher location report. I think you'll find it really interesting. It focused on a number of different institution types. I'm looking at my notes here. Nope, I'm gonna go on. And then here's one example of one of the slides in there, college attainment rates by zip code and by institution. And then if you keep going through the report, it breaks it down on the type of institution and the location of incoming education majors and outgoing first-year teachers in relationship to how they're choosing their teaching preparation locale and vicinity from which they come. There's not much surprising in here. We all know they come, 30 miles, I think. I think it's pretty much documents the claim that happens nationally that in Michigan we see that most of your candidates are coming in some civic radius of your institution. However, interesting data, and there are multiple reports on there, so go use the link and check it out. We'll provide you more content on that as we go through it as well. Good practices?
Yep, turning it over to you guys.
Okay. As a follow-up to our last meeting where our colleagues from Teaching Works University of Michigan and Arbor provided an overview of high leverage teaching practice and how they interrelate with the core practices and forthcoming programming expectations. We had Nicole and Karen give a high-level overview, and a lot of the requests at that time were to get some very specific feedback as to how this gets infused into programs as we start looking at 2021 and thereafter, and what resources and what guidance can you get to move forward. So it's my great pleasure to introduce my colleagues who are plugging in a computer.
Oh, good news, came back great.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah. Great as it would be had.
So Paula, who starred in the last video that Leo played, so I was concerned that throws up. Paula, really be like the Oscars. But it's my great pleasure to have two wonderful colleagues, Paul Lancaster from Francis American University, speak on behalf of the many colleagues in the Michigan Program Network and some of the initiatives that they've been working on that situates this work within K-12 context. It really speaks to what Doug was getting at, is how do we speak the same language and get to those same goals with regard to K-12 and higher ed. So I'll turn this over to them. I want to note in advance that although our time is running short, we'll have opportunity to work with you and speak to you a little later on. It will be opportunity to follow up with questions then. So without further ado, Paula, please take it away, and thank you very much for joining us here today.
Okay. So for those of you who are online, just a quick reminder, if you could mute yourself while you're not speaking, that would be great. I think it would help everyone to be able to hear very clearly. And we'll do our best to speak into the microphone, as odd as that might feel. So thank you, all of you, for allowing us this time. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Mike, for bringing up that meeting. I'm glad he actually did, because one thing I wanted to say is, at some point in the clip, a gentleman named Steve was talking. He kind of convened from REL, and he mentioned or alluded to kind of a champion for this work here in Michigan, or acknowledged kind of the leadership that bring that together. And while he came right up close to, I think, naming those people, he didn't do that. And I just wanted to take a moment to specifically thank Liberty and everyone at the MBE for continuing to be committed to bringing our entire enterprise together. That's what he was talking about, and that's really just greatly appreciate those efforts. So thank you. So actually, I really was hoping to be able to walk around a little bit. So Duke and I are truly honored to be here. My name is Paula Lancaster. I am Director of Teacher Education Program at Grand Valley State University, and have had the great fortune to be part of the Michigan Program Network for a number of years now. I don't think we actually have a slide up here with all of the members, which maybe we should have thought to do that, but there are 10 of us now. Many of the institutions that are here are also represented. And we know that at the last meeting, as Mike said, a couple people, Nicole and Karen from Teaching Works, were here. They talked with you all about the overview of our work. But just as a quick refresher, we wanted to kind of remind everyone that really at the heart of what we do is that focus on both high leverage teaching practices, but also reforming our own preparation programs so that we can focus better on practice and content that serves to disrupt some of the norms of oppression, injustice that we've become so accustomed to in our institutions across the state, and that we convene regularly and have for quite some time to take on this work. Also, just a quick reminder of the notion of practices-based. This term practice is getting used in a lot of different ways, and so for the purposes of clarity, I think it helps a little bit to think about practice-based teacher preparation in one particular way, which means kind of, I guess, globally can be thought of less about talking about teaching, more about actually getting candidates to engage in the work of teaching with regular feedback and taking a developmental approach to ensuring that they're ready for that work of teaching. Practices we're using to also acknowledge that within that work is a focus on multiple teaching practices, those high leverage or core practices, as we're, whatever term we're using for them. So we wanted to just point that out a little bit too, just to kind of make sure our terminology is clear. And I'm going to turn it over to Tooth now for an overview, and we'll get started.
So we're framing our talk around 4 things. One is how we, at 2 different institutions, so this is not a one-size-fits-all, it's very much idiosyncratic based on your institution and who you are and the people you serve. So one of the things we're going to show you is how we've integrated in high leverage practices into our programs, both how Grand Valley State has done it and how Oakland has done it, how we assess candidate performance with high leverage practices, and how we use it as a shared framework with mentor teachers. And then finally, just areas we're still working on as institutions.
Many areas we're still working on. So my conversation will probably be a little bit larger kind of overview, and I think Tuke is going to dig in a little bit deeper to what's happening in Oakland. We realize we're a little bit pressed for time, so we're going to go through this a little bit quicker, but we do still want to ask any questions or answer any questions that you might have as we go along, so please do feel free to stop, and then, as Michael said, we'll have those 2 other opportunities to talk with you all. So at Grand Valley State, we are focusing on particular practices within our program. And we spent a great deal of time thinking about and prioritizing what those practices might be. We had the luxury, because we started in the program network from the very beginning, of taking almost a year to really think this through a little bit. And so you'll see some of the ones that we are focusing on. And I've left the terms for these a little bit open, so they're not the exact same wording that you'll see on, say, the list of high leverage practices at Teaching Works. We are also engaged with CEDAR and the Council for Exceptional Children in integrating the special education high leverage practices that will soon be part of the standards that CED will release for entry into the professional field of special education. So what you see on this list also acknowledges the overlap between the general education and special education HLPs. There are differences and similarities across all of these. So for example, the group work, I think the exact title of the general education group work HLP or core practice is setting up and managing small group work, setting up and managing small group work. And the special education side, it's more of a focus on flexible grouping. So there are some components of those 2 practices that are very similar, some that are a little bit different. Same thing with the emphasis on explicit instruction, some similarities, some differences. So we did also purposefully take a look at the things that we could work on simultaneously across general and special education. But really what drove our decision was trying to balance practices that we felt like we might do fairly well at this point, based on what we emphasize in our program, and mix those with some practices that our K-12, P-12 partners and students told us we might need to work a little bit more. So, actually, I skipped ahead to this one. So then what we ended up with were a few practices that we felt were already very prominent in our programs: explicit instruction, the provision of feedback, developing healthy relationships with students and students with each other. Those are things that we already have currently been emphasizing quite a bit. And then the others that were our kind of key focus areas are areas that our partners told us we really needed to work on. So the reason we did it this way is that we found that getting started in integrating HLPs or core practices into our program seemed like a really daunting task. And the getting started part can be sometimes the most complex. So we thought if we balanced it a little bit with areas that we already felt were a strength, and we could just shore those up a little bit and feel like, okay, we're that much better at these things, but also dig into some areas that we know are really critically important and that we have been kind of vague about how we teach these sorts of things. So we knew we modeled group work quite a bit in our own teaching. In our own classrooms, group work was happening often. We were asking students during their teacher assisting semester to actually engage in group work with their students, but we were not deliberately taking that practice apart and teaching it to them in any specific way. And so that was one place where we thought, we've got a lot of work to do here, and we know we need to do it. So we really relied on an analysis of our own program, as well as feedback from our partners to decide which practices to focus on. And always, you see at the bottom of that screen and all the screens, there's always a focus on equity. And I'm going to get to that a little bit more. But in every conversation that we have about our reforms to our program or changes to our program, I think this notion of thinking about creating equitable classrooms, equitable situations for all of our students is always at the forefront. It's always something that we think about and talk about and really work on. And just like one of our kind of major changes here is less talking about teaching, more doing teaching, the same thing holds with the question or issue of equity and social justice. less talking about these issues and more thinking about how do we ensure that these things are happening in classrooms and that they're being addressed in classrooms. So just a little bit more about the integration of practice. We also chose 2 additional ones in each of our general education colleagues are focusing on 2 that we think are critically important: eliciting and interpreting student thinking, being kind of foundational to almost everything that we do, and then leading classroom discussions. And also in special education, we added 2 additional ones that those areas in particular, those faculty in particular, are focusing on. And then also, okay, once we chose them, that's one part of the work, but then the really deep part of the work, the hard work here is deciding where and how we are going to model, demonstrate, or represent each of the HLPs. So those spaces had to be created. We mapped out the curriculum to determine where those things would happen, where we would teach these practices explicitly. And that part of it wasn't quite as difficult as the next 2. I think, most of the people who had been part of the program network would say the same thing when we started. And that is that almost all of the enactment or actual doing of the practices has kind of been passed on to student teaching, or whatever that field experience is prior to student teaching. That's where it sort of all happened. And what we're trying to do is really change that so that in those first few semesters, we are already beginning to help our candidates flex some muscle around the work of teaching, so that they actually have an opportunity to approximate practices in some way. Maybe not in front of children or youth, but they're trying it out. We're using a lot of simulation to help them do that a little bit more, a lot of role play kinds of time and opportunities. And this is challenging because we only have them for so much time. We know we can't continue to have 5- and 6-year programs in teacher preparation. So we had to decide what we were going to move around, what we were going to take out, what we were going to do differently in order to make face-to-face time for our candidates to do these things. So we're creating some online independent modules that cover information. We don't need necessarily to use our time in front of our students for lecturing about information, factual types of things that they need to know. We're putting that somewhere else in many cases so that we can free up some time together to do more of these types of things and give our candidates feedback on the work that they're doing with students, or will be doing with students. And then also building in some more very controlled, supervised opportunities for students to practice particular things with children and youth. And then those things will also build and develop over time until we get to student teaching. We also truly believe that this will help us grapple a little bit with the number of students who get to that final year and a half of their program and decide, oh, teaching isn't for me. They will have lots of opportunities along the way to develop their skills, their skill set, to feel more confident, or to decide at a much earlier stage of the game that isn't the case. So what we mean by focusing on equity and justice, as I said there, it's about paying particular attention to the way that high leverage or core practices get enacted with students. So we have been able to examine a few particular practices together as faculty. So we have a couple of professional learning communities that have developed over time with faculty, but also with our partners in the K-12 schools, where we meet regularly. When we talk about teaching, we talk about practice, but we also look at it in a particular way and are constantly asking ourselves the question of how can we ensure that this particular practice is enacted in an inclusive way. It's enacted in a way that all children have a chance or an opportunity to be heard or to be seen as smart and thoughtful and competent by their teacher and by their peers. The common example that we use is if you watch an average kind of classroom discussion in which the candidate, a new teacher, or even a seasoned teacher hasn't really thought about this or thought about that practice through this lens, what you'll see is a classroom discussion that really serves to privilege students with strong vocabularies and lots of confidence. So they participate more often, They are the ones who get to be seen as smart and competent by their peers. And then the students maybe with less developed vocabularies or with less amount of confidence, or just kids who are naturally inclined to be more reflective in their thinking, they're on the sidelines listening. It's like a game of elimination. So we're trying to examine each practice that way and think about, are we preparing our students, our candidates, to be able to enact this practice in a way that disrupts what we typically see happening in schools and gives all children a chance to really shine and be heard. So that's one way we're thinking about it. We're also deliberately examining our own inclination toward biases and sharing that with our students and pushing them to do the same thing. We bring in an expert every single year. He spends about a week with us and our candidates and then follows up with us all the time. This is something we've done for 5 years now, and it really has served to put this notion of bias and privilege and also just the injustices that we see in classroom at the forefront of our thinking. And then I think you can kind of make sense of what the rest of the bullet points up there say. But I do think that last one is worth talking about. I think that this focus on core practices and practice-based approaches to teacher preparation will actually help us as a field close the gap that we see, that within program gap between the high-performing beginner teachers and the more lower-performing beginner teachers. Because right now, there's a couple studies, the one that came out of Missouri that I think really pushed this point home, in which the researchers tried to determine whether or not a particular type of program or where a program came out of. So a research one, a regional, a private institution, or a alternative route kind of provider. Are any of these programs places where teachers are prepared? Are any of them better for beginner teachers? Do they increase the skillfulness? Is it better to go through a particular program? Generally, what they found is that they couldn't really compare the programs against each other because there was just as much within program variation between highly skilled and not so highly skilled candidates as there was between all of them. So our task is to close that gap, because until we do that, we can't really ensure that all children are getting well-trained, highly skilled teachers on day one, because we're always going to have those that we're a little bit hesitant about. And so we're really working hard to do that, and that's one of the ways that we're also, I think, enacting a focus on equity. Assessment is a work in progress at Grand Valley. We have completely changed our observation tool. We've crosswalked the core practices or high leverage practices with the in-task standards and also created different levels of observation tools for the different observations that we make with students. So they know exactly what we're looking for and exactly what our expectations are. But we've pulled out key components of particular practices that we're constantly looking for. So they know going in what the expectations for enactment will be in all of their field placements. That's one way that we've tried to address our own assessments. And then we've also been locating opportunities within our program to give them chances to practice through simulation with feedback from peers as well as from instructors. That's beginning to happen more frequently as they move through the program. And always there is this focus from our end toward precision and clarity in how we're describing what the practice should look like. Because what we noticed years ago as we were analyzing multiple observation forms from our university field coordinators or field observation people is that, obviously everyone who's doing these observations was interpreting what they were seeing a little bit differently, and there was just a lack of precision and clarity about what it is that we were seeing and what we wanted our candidates to do. And then I want to talk a little bit about, I think, some of the most satisfying work that I have had the good fortune to do, and that is our work with our K-12 partners. And I know that TUF would say the same thing. This is the high leverage practices or core practices have just really given us a space to come together with our partners. When we talk about this focus and this move within our program, it immediately resonates with them. This approach makes sense to teachers and our mentor teachers and principals. So we've had a couple long-term professional learning communities with teachers, with teacher leaders, and with principals in a couple different districts where we examine teaching together. We look specifically at high leverage practices that we've decided together will be our focus. Our teacher candidates are in the mix as well, and we have worked together to make some decompositions, and they've helped us with our observation tools as well. So it is just a wonderful way to begin or build or strengthen partnerships, and to, I think more importantly, develop that shared language and understanding about what it is that we're looking for and what it is that we're seeing in our candidates. So actually, I don't know what I still have left. But the same thing happens in our meetings with our K-12, so with our K-12 partners. We meet generally after school for an hour and a half or so once a month. One of our district partners, we meet with them for half days every other month. And we always talk also about issues of equity and how we're ensuring that what's happening in the classroom is building inclusivity for all students, is hearing the voices of all of our students, and that we're all on the same page as far as the language that we're using as well. Oh, no, I'm going to actually move on because I know we're short for time, so I can come back to that part if we want to. Okay, so 5 minutes. So, yeah, so this past summer we did our first conference for cooperating teachers and field coordinators, where we invited all of them to come for a day. We had about 150 people come, which was great. And we focused on teaching specific mentoring pedagogies, like rehearsals, huddles, feedback, specific feedback that we wanted to focus on. We had a few sessions on particular high leverage practices, a few sessions on co-teaching models that we're using in our program, and then also just a few sessions on our expectations and requirements, where we got feedback from them on their expectations and requirements. It was a wonderful day, lots of suggestions about, let's continue this, maybe expand this to 2 days or build on it, but we were really excited for a number of reasons. I think the primary one was the extent to which teachers who serve as our mentor teachers and many building principals really want to be a part of this conversation and really do want to be recognized as part of the whole enterprise of preparing teachers and ensuring teachers stay and improve and continue to be committed to the field. So that was just a really wonderful day for us, and we're looking forward to a lot more of those. And where we're headed, we have so much work left to do, and we do realize that we're continuing to work on that shared understanding of all of the practices that we're focused on, and making sure that the language that is spoken in content classrooms or content pedagogy classrooms is mirrored as students progress through our program. So the coherence has been a central theme as we think about the new certification bands, for example, but also as we kind of rework our own program. We would love to have a situation in which students can begin our program and understand the path, and it makes sense to them as they see themselves at the end of it, and then they can stand back at the end and say, yeah, that all made sense. That was all connected and developmental and built on other. And we want that kind of coherence horizontally, so that, of course, that, across the different content areas, but also vertically as they move forward, and really trying to think deeply about that. And it's challenging. It's really, really challenging work, as I'm sure you're all aware. And also for ourselves and our own improvement, we're working on getting better, learning more about particular pedagogies for preparation. How do we use video better to prepare our teachers and to help them learn, to reflect, to give feedback, to help us get better at what we're doing? How can we use more rehearsals so that students have a chance to build their skillfulness before
what they're doing at Grand Valley
simulations? So
yeah.
Do, and
he's gonna do it, and then Tooth's gonna do something on what they're doing.
Any questions?
Yeah, she's. She just finished and now they're doing questions.
But we'll be at the deep session, I think the first time, if you have any questions, and then there's a highlight practice session.
MC and Petoskey.
So I start with a disclaimer.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Off like we are done with this work, we know what we're doing, we're like the Sherpas. It's hard work, it's complicated, it's difficult, but we've just made some progress and we're sharing our progress with you. But we want you to know that these are deep works in progress. So that's my disclaimer. So why shift to practice-based teacher ed? So this is the sort of overview of what I'm going to argue today. First is the cohesion across the disparate spaces of teacher ed. And second is that how much practices really have the potential to vastly improve teacher education. So I hope this comes clear. So first, we had a problem in the secondary department at secondary teacher ed at Oakland, and but it wasn't just at Oakland. I think every place I've been before this has had very similar problems. Program courses were a series of discrete experiences. Like each course was standalone, could be taken in almost any order, and there was very little go-between across courses. We had plenty of field experiences, really deep embedded field experiences, but they were unintentional. There was no assigned, we had a long list of, here's potentially things you can do, but what we didn't have is any intentional experiences in these different places. Mentor teachers had to form their own plan for their intern. We gave them a bunch of paperwork, but rarely would they read it, and I don't blame them, because it sounded like educational jargon. Additionally, interns were left, and the hardest part of all this is interns were left to navigate their own particular learning experiences idiosyncratically, right? So their navigation, they became the experts of their learning experience, which we can't expect novices to put together these things into a coherent whole of learning. So these were problems with OU's secondary program. But once we started to work on college practices, we began about 2013, we started to notice the coherence that began to emerge in the secondary program across courses and semesters, across content areas, and between the field and the university. So across the courses and semesters, we actually, you can look, this is our 4 semesters, and you can see eliciting individual student thinking and explaining and modeling content. In our first class, we cover very early versions of those 2 practices. And across the different semesters, those continue on. They become a little more complex, and they grow, they grow in some complexity across time and some authenticity, meaning their rehearsals are deeper, or their enactments are deeper embedded in classes across time. But we maintain a focus on these across the whole program. So they begin with the same rubric that they end with. It's just growing across the rubric and growing across time in that. So that's one way we've started to bring coherence across time, across semesters. And you can see, like, this is how we've integrated it, and this is just, it's just a table to show you, but the first class, they try a 200-second lesson. The second class, a round of practice. The second class, they try a 5 to 10-minute lesson with kids. The third class, they do it in the context of all of teaching. So it gets more and more authentic across time and more complex across time with the content they'll use, and that's just how we grow that way with the practices. In content areas, we found a lot of coherence that never existed. Before this, what did we have to talk about in the different content areas? My colleague tried to integrate understanding by design as a common framework across the content areas. It didn't work because all that happened was the different teachers, the different professors just said, oh, well, I do this in my class. And I said, I do this in my class. I do this in my class. There was no work across these content areas. But what high leverage practices has done, and what's that supposed to be, is they're bigger rectangles. It's a common space that all of us use. These high leverage practices really have common elements across these disciplinary areas. So the explaining and modeling something in math and in ELA and social studies and science, there are common elements. For instance, how did you use visuals to help kids understand things? How did you use analogies? All disciplines use visuals and analogies and different elements. Then in the different discipline areas, we show you mathematically what do those pieces mean. So, social scientifically, what do those pieces mean? In English, what do these people mean? What do the principles mean? So you can see, this is for instance, on Wednesday morning, we meet in a big seminar. We cover a single high leverage practice with all the disciplines, the general elements, and then at night, each of us have our methods class where we take the general elements and make them disciplinary, and give them disciplinary flavor at the nighttime. So our whole cohort of interns has been able to dip into the same structure, which has brought amazing conversations across discipline areas. So that's the second content coherence is of the content. So the third is between the field and the university. So high leverage practices have enabled us a lot of commonality with our teachers. So university representatives, in the past, this is my experience, it might be yours. In the past, we've had these very differing relationship with teachers. Sometimes respect and fear, sometimes hatred and disdain, other times admiration, other times complete, they just ignored us. You know, all these things, but what I never had across my 10 years of doing this was substantive cooperation. And I'm calling it was tangential cooperation. We had the same goal, make great teachers, but it was too general of a goal to work together on. I had never had substantive cooperation with mentor teachers. What high leverage practices have offered is this collaboration across similar learning points. They have high face validity, just like Paula said. Our teachers look at our list, look at the decomposition of our list, they're like, yeah, this is my job. And one of my teachers, she said, you're taking my 15 years of training and my 15 years of experience and turning it into a training. I'm like, that's exactly what we're doing. We're taking good practice that all of us had to learn by ourselves through trial and error over a decade. And what we're trying to do is make it more embedded in a training so that they leave like they're much more experienced. They don't have to learn these lessons over and over again. And they're common, and we have common assessments with these mentor teachers. So, for instance, for 2 full weeks, we'll work on explaining and modeling content in my class. In all the different methods classes, we're working on explaining and modeling content. While the interns are in the field for those 2 weeks, they're also working on explaining and modeling content. So they know, their mentor knows, here's the target practice for 2 weeks. And so the teacher might say, okay, watch me model this, watch me explain this. And they're focusing deeply on those practices. And then we'll move to the next one, tasks, texts, and learning goals. How do you create meaningful texts and tasks? And during those 2 weeks, the interns should be focusing on that both in their mentors, in their methods class and in their mentors classroom. So it becomes this mechanism to mix together and work together across these 2 disparate spaces of the field and the university. So for us, in our work, this is the things we've learned working with our mentor teachers. First of all, their input is critical to this. I'll give you an example. I have a rubric and for explaining modeling content, and I spent 2 years developing it. One of my teachers said, from Armada High School, Eric, he said, this is not helpful. I'm like I spent 2 years, and the only person who could use it was me. That's not good, right? That's a bad rubric. And so what he did was, do you mind if I just make this simpler? I'm like, no, go ahead. What he came up with was 10 times better than mine. I have completely changed the rubric that all of us use because his model was clearer and simpler and more enactable than mine. So that's one way. If we're creating things in our side of the university that they can't use and don't help them, it's worthless. It's no value. So working with our mentors has really helped us recreate and change our rubrics and recreate our assignments so that they are usable by both parties. It offers them, we've been trying to get them to build across schools and leave us out of it, and it's starting to happen. Like these teacher leaders in the buildings are starting to contact each other, starting to host each other in their buildings. It's really amazing how the teachers are picking up this great work. We had to create usable materials, just like simple rubric, 1 page. We have a thing called a single column rubric. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where you just take the proficient and there's 2 blanks on either side, and that's it. It's way easier to read than our full rubric. It's way easier to use. And that's what they wanted. We made 1-page sheets about high leverage practice, just 1 page. And it's just for because they don't have time to read all this stuff that we have to do. And there's no reason for them to. And we rely heavily on the teacher leaders. So the high leverage practices in this has created a different sort of relationship and dynamic across the university and field schools, and a real coherence of it that I had never experienced before. So assessing candidates with high leverage practices. Here's a problem that I used to have. Before high leverage practices, the candidate's teaching performance did not match their assignments they turned into me. Has anybody seen that before? Like they turn in work to you, it's like, whoa, this is beautiful, and isn't it? And then you go watch the page and it's nothing like that. Like what you see is not what's on paper. That's a problem because if all we're doing at the university is collecting the lesson plan, looking at it, they all look like brilliant teachers. But the minute you go out and see them in the field, you're just like, wow, what have you been doing? I don't know if that's happened to you, but it happens to me a lot in my class. That happened a lot. I would go out and watch them and I'm like, did you even sit in my method? Were you listening at all during my methods class? So assessing their teaching was difficult because we didn't have a common and established understanding of good teaching. It was implied, and implied things can't help novices grow. They need clarity. And so once we started to bring the high leverage practice framework more into what we do at Oakland, it's provided opportunities to assess candidates different. We have common and consistent rubrics now across classes, across the whole cohort. Everything is formative. I think Paula mentioned that. It is not evaluative until the end. Of course, we have output measures, but it is all formative, which is coaching-based and deep practice-based. We don't expect proficiency throughout time. It is how do you get better from where you're at. And at the end, we do have a summative, but you can see after each 2-week period of time, they will collect artifacts of an attempt they did with their kids, and they will use a rubric, and they'll gauge where they're at with that practice. And we have assessments at multiple points in that semester, and you can see multiple points. Once we do one practice explaining modeling context or content, we have one version in the first semester, one in the second, 3 in the third, so they try it again, and then a final. But those track of growth trajectory across time for these interns in this high leverage practice, and this helps so much. They watch their year go, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this was me. I've learned so much since then. They can see their own growth. It's really an exciting thing. But assessment is a problem, like using all of this data because interns are just turning in case after case and you don't know what to do with all of it. So we're trying to work on methods of peer assessment. We're trying to make these things their mentor teachers will use. We've got some will use the data that the intern is collecting, but not all, so we're trying to keep bolstering that. University supervisors can use these assessments. University faculty can use these assessments. All of us together can use the things that they're collecting to assess their performance. So a couple of areas that we're trying to work on and improve at Oakland is, the first one is we have had a very heavy emphasis on improving the instruction of our interns, just the basic instruction, and I think that's very appropriate for a methods class. But I don't think that high leverage practices are alone in instruction only. They also can measure how socially just is the classroom. Are you leading a classroom discussion in a way that a socially justice-oriented teacher would do so? Are you privileging students equally? This practice-based approach is not just instruction. It also includes exceptionalities. Are you including all kids who have been historically marginalized or have some sort of learning disability? These areas become coaching and improvement trajectories across multiple strands of teacher education. And we're still growing in that, but we know it's possible. And the final thing is we're trying to improve lines of communication and collaboration around these high leverage practices between us and the mentor teachers. It's very difficult. We have some who are totally interested, totally involved with us, and we have others who quit after the first year because they hate this approach. They want to do their own coaching approach. And it's like, well, Oakland's not for you. We need people who want to get on the team and help us build the team. So anyway, that's it. I think we're at the end. So we have how long for 10 minutes for questions or comments or anything you'd like clarity on? And for either of us. All right, thank you.
No. Well, before we do that.
Is that what you wanted? You got a professional videographer that was planning on doing the K-Annual report because you asked for it?
No, that was a certification officer.
Okay. Let's talk about it.
But we can do that.
Okay, there we go. I did want to say a couple of things as a follow-up to this excellent presentation on high leverage practices. You've seen, and perhaps this week it may not have been seen due to closures and things like that, but we've been planning a what I call the Congress of EPI Representatives to help focus our statewide implementation of core practices. So we've rebranded HLPs as our core practices for teacher education. And it's as part of our overall rollout of new standards and new requirements with our new certificate structure. And we envision our standards for a particular grade bands, or PK3 standards, the clinical experience requirements, and the core practices to be braided together to create a cohesive program of study for teacher education in these new grade bands. And we, as you've just heard, the implementation of the core practices, or HLPs, at both Grand Valley and Oakland did not happen overnight, and nor did it happen with 19 declarations suddenly implemented. So we want to phase this in, particularly for our institutions that have not been utilizing this framework, and to ease the burden of making this transition and this shift. And so we can call for a Congress of EPI representatives. And the purpose of this Congress is to vote, literally vote, on a subset of the core practices that we will work with first. Both for implementation, so we will be looking for, as you describe your programs for PK3 and 3.6, for the applications that you'll be doing for that, and also to help with our data collection. We'd like to align our surveys around the core practices so that you can get some formative data on baseline data, informative data on how your candidates are doing, or the perceptions of preparation and in these core practices. And so we had originally scheduled this for February 5th, but we only had about a third of our institutions send us names of people to attend. So we've changed the date and sent that information out on Tuesday this week to February 19th. February 19th in Lansing at the Library of Michigan from 1 to 4 p.m. And we sort of exhort each EPI to send one person. And the reason we want one person is we want to make it fair across all of our EPIs. And it was, if you nominated somebody already that you think, oh, I didn't know that that was the purpose, maybe we need to bring somebody else, that's fine. Dan has sent out a call for EPI reps, along with a PK-12 representative, somebody that your institution works with who is embedded within PK-12 schools. Principal, we have had some people who have very innovative, some institutions with very innovative embedded teacher preparation programs within schools, sending somebody who works with that because they're deeply connected to the schools. Because we want to forge this common language between our educator preparation institutions and our PK-12 partners. And so what we will do at this Congress is review the project, host some presentations very similar to what you just saw on other entities that have winnowed down their initial focus in core practices and implementation. Like, what are the foundational ones? MACD has done this work. Our CEDAR Technical Assistance has done this work. We'll present that information in the process that they went through. Address questions, and then dot storm. All 19 practices out. Everyone will get to, who is participating, will have an opportunity to vote. And our goal at the end of the day is to come to a subset of 4 to 6 practices that we will put our feet forward. If you trust the wisdom of your fellow EPIs and do not want to participate in this, please let us know so that we're not pestering institutions. We sent this original invitation to 1 person per institution. So we didn't send it out to the whole DARTEP lister. We sent it to deans and directors, the people we thought could make that call of who would be the best representative. So some of you may say, I never saw this email. And that would be why. Beth.
I saw this email the first time. I haven't seen the email that was canceled thing.
All right, I'll ask Dan to investigate that and see. Because it went out, I know it went out Tuesday, but I get it with a blind copy, so I don't see all of the people that it went to. Yeah, it would come from Dan. It would have been Tuesday, late afternoon. No, it had rescheduled in all caps in the subject line. Sandy? You did? Okay. All right. I will connect with Dan to make sure. But the information that I just said is basically the information that's in that email. There will also be a virtual option. So we're going to have if you cannot physically attend but are able to join via Zoom, we will have participation that way and the ability to vote through that, and we'll do proxy voting so that the people who are online, their voices are represented in this work. All right, any questions on that? Not to raise the level of concern. The goal is to really get a consensus on a pathway forward, and then we can focus our technical support on a subset and move forward with that. Shall we do the lunch ready?
Lunch is ready.
Well, I will have you come up and direct people.
Lunch is in the main lobby that you came in with. The food is all set up there, and then we're going to bring the food back in here. There's beverages both back there and out there for you. They are going to kind of change out and refresh things over our lunchtime. Also, right after lunch, we're going to leave the deans and directors in this room instead of going up to 2020. We're going to have that group stay in here for that first job-alike section. So we'll go out and get lunch, and then you want to see 2:45 or 12:45? Yep. Okay. So at 12:45, you'll wander to the different breakout rooms that are listed in the agenda. Accreditation is in 1060. Deans and directors will now stay here. Clinical experiences in student teaching will be in 1040, 1050, which is right along the same hallway. But lunch is ready for us. So.
For those of you who are online, if you'd like to check back, Gina will have a presentation starting at 12:30, and then we'll leave the online portion open here for deans and directors, and we will record the certification officer presentation. We will get everything up on the DARTEP website as soon as we have it, so that you can see it and have access to everything from today. Thank you.
Yep. I'm just going.
The system will open, well, hopefully it's open now. They said January, but hopefully it's open now. Okay, yesterday, so there we go. They were on time. They were on time. We should celebrate that. That doesn't always happen. Anyway, it's open for 90 days. Last year's reviews were completed by volunteers, just like your site visit teams. So the reviewers had time, they had a template to use, and then they provided some feedback to you. When you get that feedback, which I know you haven't gotten yet because I finished some annual report reviews 2 weeks ago that hadn't been completed. So they're still getting that system put together. When you get the feedback, it really is specifically on the specific questions or what the reviewer saw that didn't make any sense. So, and those people, we got a 45-minute webinar to be trained with. So just kind of, I'm sure this coming year will be more fluid with that. So the reviewers were trained to find any information that was inconsistent between years. So I was looking at 2017 and 2018, and I was looking for inconsistencies between the two reports, particularly with numbers. We were asked to flag anything that seemed inconsistent. Those inconsistencies ranged from, 2017, you've got 48 advanced completers, and then 2018, there are no advanced completers. That's an inconsistency. Another inconsistency is if you jump from their ranges, the 0 to 50, 50 to 150, 150 to 300. If your numbers change range, we have to alert CAPE of that because they charge you more or less money. We also are required to click all the links. We had to go check with your accreditor, your HLC accreditor, or your higher ed accreditor to make sure you were on that list and you were still accredited. They had us checking the links for the annual measures. And the title, your numbers should come from Title II as much as possible. That's the expectation of CAPE. Only major changes should be reported in substantive changes. Major changes, like you've changed the whole structure of your university. You've changed where you're housed, or you've adjusted your entire philosophy. Leadership change, if you've got a new dean, that's not considered a substantive change anymore because that process happens so often. So that's not something you have to worry about. So make sure you or whoever's completing this annual report look very carefully at the changes that are listed and only indicate if one of those changes were made. Your display of annual reporting measures, they are expecting this. They are expecting all 8. They are expecting all 8 to be publicly available. One of the challenges in the reports I reviewed this past year are that publicly available doesn't mean I click and I get onto your website and then there's another link and I click that link and it takes me to another website and I have to click another link and that opens a PDF that I literally have to dig through. That's what a lot of people have been posting, and that is not what they're looking for. They're looking for immediate, instant information one click away. So really they're looking for kind of a face page that provides some of those metrics and some of that information on those 8 measures. If you send them to your larger institutional reports from somewhere else, or you send them to even like our EPI score report, that's not going to give them what they need. The other thing they're looking for is that the measures that you provide are tagged to these CAPE measures. And that's something I will tell you, none of the institutions I reviewed were able to do. So this is not something everybody should think, oh my gosh, I'm not doing this. This is something that they will be talking to you more about or expecting. But those publicly displayed measures really need to be, if you can get your webmaster to just create a page that provides quick infographic style information, I really think that's what they're looking for, not to have to dig into another report. So, and the expectation is that all 8 measures are displayed. I know a lot of institutions I've seen the consequences be is that your reviewers read those, the last 2. And so they will read the feedback potentially, and that's something I'm still yet to verify.
Probably show improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Reviewers would say, boy, they're clueless, they got it now.
Yes. Then right now, that's the consequence I see for annual report, that it is reviewed as part of that site visit. So I'm not saying they're not gonna put something else in place, because these are required pieces that have to be done. But for now, it really lays right in the site visit. And those are the impacts. So yeah, we have the 4 impact measures, impact on learning, teaching effectiveness, satisfaction of employers and employees, and then our outcome measures, graduation rates, certification requirements, the ability for your completers to be hired in those ed positions. Your student loan default rates can be your institutional student loan default rate. That doesn't have to be your teaching growth area. And then the other piece is that they also ask you for a summary and an analysis of the data that you provide for those 8 reporting measures. And I did notice that every once in a while an institution, and I didn't review any in Michigan institutions, but every once in a while one of the institutions I reviewed kind of forgot about this prompt. And it is an important prompt because it is looking for you to discuss what are you doing with this data that you're displaying for these 8 measures. How do you use that data? So they're asking us to flag those little narratives that you provide. They're asking us to flag them if you do not respond to every prompt they provide. Even though the direction says, please respond to the following prompts, but it doesn't actually say you have to, just to let you know they are actually having us flag if one of the prompts isn't responded to. So just make sure you've given them something for each of the prompts. Yes?
Question from a remote person.
Okay.
Are the 8 measures the same at the initial and advanced level?
Yes, they are. Actually, if you double check that, there's a couple of them. Impact is not advanced. Maybe not teaching effectiveness. Double check the list. All of the outcome measures are, but there's a couple of the input measures that aren't. So impact measures. So double check the CAPE website, and it will tell you which ones. Other questions? For the Section 5, AFIs and stipulations and weaknesses, please make sure that if you have an AFI or a stipulation or a weakness from an old TAC report, you are definitely addressing this. That is also something that your site visitors will notice if they don't see those being addressed in your annual report. And finally, make sure that you're also addressing all the prompts for the continuous improvement section, and that you're able to have that clear information about what you're doing with your data. Questions? My primary suggestion for the annual reports is if they ask you to self-identify gaps, unless it is something you are writing about all the time and you're working on constantly, I would say maybe not identify gaps, because that will be something your site visitors will be looking for. Anything you identify as identified gaps, that's going to go on a list that your site visitors investigate. So just kind of think about what you're sharing. Make sure you're sharing what they're requesting. But there are a few tricky questions on there that if you do say yes to, make sure you've got the information for. Any questions? Yes?
Is this part of the PowerPoint on the DARTEP website?
Yes, it is. And feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions. I'm happy to help with annual reports as they come out. Thank you.
All right, we are going to change the room for deans and directors. Stay here and we'll leave the open communication going on for the people who are out virtually. Accreditation officers, student teaching directors, and and certification officers go to the rooms that are listed. And we will see you back here at The certification officers are gonna go a little bit longer, but everybody else come back here at 1:30. See you later.
And then deans and directors.
You have everybody but certain things.
Okay. Good. Leah. Or she met.
Yeah. Accreditation. I'm gonna do this one. This one. I think that's gonna be getting worse.
Oh, no, that's all. We'll see, let's see how people like shuffle. Let's see who stays. Yeah. And we're staying with MD.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is where deans and directors should be.
Should we stay here or should we move up?
Move up so everybody can see you, because everybody's still online.
Yeah, we still have 57 people online.
So we have to turn that around and here.
It wouldn't hurt, I guess. You could do that.
Dangerous, we don't have, the person who was monitoring it is now in a different room.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I'm gonna see if I can log on with the Gmail account.
All right, so there it is. And this is the one Big Bang Theory, right? And Sheldon is on the virtual presence simulator, whatever. All right. I can bring this even closer, I guess. Let's see. Chug, 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 chug. I hope.
I am, and normally we ask someone from Western kind of host to facilitate. So I'm not trying to facilitate and think at the same time.
I was talking to Gina, and she was going to look at the accreditation.
It is often.
And so there weren't that many, they didn't come back here. So maybe pause for just a second.
Sure. Okay, we'll pause for a little bit of time while the other group determines if there's sufficient numbers to warrant having 2 meetings, or if we can pick the 2. Maybe I'll have Marcia sort of facilitate us while I type the minutes, but we'll get going in a few moments.
Sure.
As a backdrop to this, during our last meeting at Wayne State University, I was trying to facilitate and type, and Kevin had to type, because all the questions were of me about the Teaching Works presentation, or about the Michigan Program Network. And so that frankly precipitated the need to have 2 folks on the ground with that work here today. So we'll just give it another minute to determine if this other group will integrate with us. And then Marcia can kind of take it from there. I'll take it away. It doesn't have to be just about the presentation, but we want to make sure that people respond to it.
Will we know if online people? comments or questions? Like, is there somebody monitoring the online comment box?
So is the plan to just talk about teaching works in this meeting?
No, but I wanted to make sure I had teaching works people here, because last time at the Deans and Directors, every single question for the entire 45 minutes was about Michigan Program Network.
Right.
I didn't want to be the only voice of the whole.
I see you as omnipresent.
Well, that role didn't exist in the same way. So when the work was found, it would have been counted.
Gotcha.
Because I've tried to explain the role to people before.
Good luck.
And I couldn't. Try to steal more people. Doing that for you, Paula.
Jason Moore, teaching works now.
Will we know?
No, I assume they're not coming now.
Okay. Facilitate away, Marcia.
Okay.
So if questions about HLPs, et cetera, here.
Yeah. Sorry. Get our backs to people. That's okay. The topics that came up this morning, are there other questions or topics that we want to bring back to the group? Kind of do the share outs, things that you heard through some of the presentations.
I put out a request to Gina, and she's going to share it with power people. And I want to see if you feel it the same way. The Cape Con / continuous improvement workshop / whatever we're calling it at Hope, all things accreditation and all things continuous improvement. One of the days is going to be talking about grade banding, and I'm part of the planning team on this. And one of my observations was, this is really good for this audience to understand the nuance. It's going to be the nuts and bolts part. Brass tacks, finally, it won't be the walking through any PowerPoint slides, but actually, here are the deadlines, here's how to fill out this paperwork, here's the things. And I thought, oh, I should send so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so to my university, realizing that day one would be not very useful for them since they're not brass tacks continuous improvement. So I put in a request to Gina to request her band of Mary followers to do an encore performance, where we would invite institutions to send their team or the people that may be working on their grade banding or a subsection of that group, depending on how big, to come. And I volunteered to provide a space at Eastern, and didn't volunteer to feed the masses, but maybe have an encore presentation for those faculty, and they can have even some crosstalk about how people are managing some of the challenges, and that might be more useful, or a useful way to spend their time. Other people think they have people at their institution that would find that valuable.
Yes, and I'm also wondering whether the same information would be covered at the Matthew retreat. I'm wondering how many places we can get.
It'll probably, I'm sure the Mackey retreat will also be talking about some of the substantive issues with creating these programs and things to infuse, and our position on some of the requirements. I think it'll be covered there as well. I think, and maybe I'm just seeing through Eastern's lens, but I know that the people that are on my team physically working on designing coursework and that might not be aren't the same people that are going to be going to Northern Michigan. So really trying to think about how to provide faculty with support, since I imagine most institutions have the same thing where curriculum is really governed by faculty, and how do we make sure faculty are hearing the same things that we're bringing back and provide the space to have feedback and conversations and have their questions answered. So the activity people also, I'm sure, we've been heavily influenced by breakbacking program changes and practical applications.
So if I'm trying to capture this correctly, but I'm listening with interest, so just I want to make sure I'm on the right track. So one component of the planning and work at that Hope conference is looking at the new elementary grade banding and so forth. And you're suggesting that you would be willing to host another meeting at Eastern that would allow for those who might not normally attend or to extend on that work maybe?
Yeah, and I think that, because the intent is to have that day be the real specific, this is what you need to do, how to submit, not here's a timeline, what does that timeline really mean? What do you physically want us to have? When will we have it? When do I have to kick my students to the curb and say, I'm sorry that I've become a teacher for 8 years instead of 6? You know, what are those actual things that we need to do? And even more substantive talk about the interwoven clinical experience and support practices. That will be the second day, as I understand it, which I think is really important for the type of people like us that go to the whole conference. But that same information would be very useful for the faculty teams that are actually working on some of the curriculum design and also having a space. You know, we have these conversations are so helpful for us, having a space where the faculty that are working on these different grade bands maybe have an opportunity to have these kinds of conversations might be a very fruitful use of time. And so that's why I had the request to Gina, if that was something that fit into MDD schedules. I'm thinking about like around May, something when the semesters for most institutions have wrapped up and, you know, there's, and I know some faculty that are not on contract, maybe they would still be interested in coming, and if they aren't, then record it and put it up online and they can look at it in September.
I guess I'd also want to know how that's going to be different from the webinars that are going to be put up online anyways. What information is going to be in those presentations that won't be?
I don't think I don't imagine there'd be huge differences in them, so it may be sufficient for people to watch webinars. But I know these meetings for me are much more useful when it's face-to-face and you can have the questions and have the crosstalk with people than it is just to sit and watch a webinar and answer email and do the other things.
One of the things that we plan on doing here is when those webinars become available is we're going to host some watch parties between the faculty and the College of Ed and Human Development and Arts and Sciences and like that, because we do get multiple invitations when people sit in their own offices about what they're seeing and hearing. And so I've already promised popcorn and chocolates, and we're just going to get a room and get folks that are involved in those grade bands together to watch together. And if we have to do a couple of them for each one, we will do that. But that's how we want to try to get those conversations going. And if other groups are going to do the same thing, then knowing who we can connect our faculty with to each other, institutions would also be a useful thing. Trying to troubleshoot, how are you doing this? Here's what we're thinking about, something like that. And that's where I see the power of meetings that you're talking about.
No, and I think they all complement each other. Because I don't know about you, but it's a heavy lift and just making sure people have the information that's going to increase the probability of our application being, oh, beautiful, love it, yes, stamp. And then that's what your job, your goal is to, much easier to give an A than justify a B.
And to your point, like we've been trying to figure out how many dozens of people we need to send to Hope, which Doug might want to hear, but it might be more pertinent for portions of that time or not. And, we've been trying to struggle with that. You know.
And that's what we were thinking. I was thinking, this was like a 5-minute thought of just, okay, this is not wait. Then what are they going to do the first day? They'll be, this is interesting, but.
So where is the discussion about the breakdown for the whole?
It's the second day. Thursday. So Wednesday. Yeah. And so, and that's going to be the main focus is, we were just discussing, it's gotta be the brass tacks at this point. It's not, you know, this is what it has to, this is what we're gonna be looking for, this is what we wanna see, this is when you're gonna have to get it to us. And you know, very practical stuff. And if there's things, it can be presented diplomatically, but I think at this point we want to know, you know, input's closed.
Because I have a new faculty member who's going to be starting in August. However, she's starting to come to some of the things they're doing now that's going to help her. And she knows about this conference, and I want her to, she's going to be our early childhood person. I want her to be there when we start talking about the days. So she said, well, I can't be there both days, but I told her I'd let her know which day would be the best.
That's the problem.
Yeah, there's that.
But, you know, so this is just something I wanted to put out and see if it makes sense, I think. You know, maybe one of those tentative drive, putting in the slot here, they haven't been asked, it's a surprise. Sean, okay, Sean, I apologize for putting you on the spot. Whenever I ask a question, the answer can be no.
Other thoughts on this topic? And throw out a related one. We know that secondary is coming out in English language arts and mathematics. How are other universities, or how are your units thinking about science and social studies in parallel with that? What are your plans for working on? It's going to be hard for us to move forward new programs in two disciplinaries and not have the others going up at the same time. Just because we have a lot of common classes that all for areas take together. So we just might have to be, and how do we do that? What are other groups that can that's to be part of?
Well, I'll just say we haven't really gone down the secondary path too much because we've been so focused on the 3 to 6. I think I'm working on the assumption that structurally there will be some parity across those disciplines. One thing that we have thought about was what you sort of alluded to already, is that there will be a core set of courses that will be the same regardless. Start there. And just, you know, based on what we've seen in the elementary one, standards, we're envisioning a lot of the same kind of integration of content practice.
Here at Western, we have a 10-year catalog teach up. And so we're going to have to transition some of our students into new programs because of the timeline. And so trying to think what the best way of doing that is. It has to be thought about now, that down the line. And as being alluded to, we are changing our secondary ed program. Our secondary ed program is going post-bac across the board. Some of our colleagues in arts and sciences looked at the numbers and they can't afford to offer some of those small classes at the undergraduate level. We can do that at the graduate level. And so it's now gone through grad program council. Next step is our application to MDE, but also then what used to be President's Council asked us now to do those changes. But in the next few years, our entire secondary program will be a graduate certificate program. Definitely something on my mind.
Well, some of the things that we've been looking at it again, I mean, in the air, talk, dust that floats away, is trying to think about how can we modulize certain courses so that people could chunk them for the different grade bands. And so it would be adjacent. So if you're chunking for the adjacent grade bands, we have to have, we think of developmental course. What are the chunks for each of the bands? And then if I wanted middle school, high school, how could I chunk that? If I wanted upper L, middle school, this. And so we really are trying to think of it in that continuum so that we can provide support for students who want multiple endorsements in a reasonable amount of time. So with that said, we need to consider the middle school now. And since we have to consider the middle school now, we have to consider the secondary now. And since we have to consider the secondary, we also have to consider our TESOL and our cognitive impairment and emotional impairment and all of those courses. Because if people are going to leave with 2 endorsements on the certificate, those are the other options. And I'm not even going to talk about music and arts, we're not even there, or BNMT. But all of those others, trying to think about that chunking and the navigating professional sequence is part of the planning. Does that make sense?
Others with the conversation that started? Any universities on this? That raised an issue earlier that I know that I will address in here and have to, is when spring semester ends, we don't have people to look for inclusion unless we're willing to pay additional funds to help. It's not an option. That's by contract. Our faculty will get reminders that they are off and they should not be saying yes to committee work permit.
From you or from the union?
With us, we have faculty who will say 2 days after the last grades are due, I'm not doing anything. See you in 4 months. Do nothing.
Including reading email.
Or changing a grade so a student can get their loan.
And that is my concern about some of the timing of when work has to be done and things like that.
Even if it's during the academic year, it's on top of pretty full workloads and schedules. So either way, it's required extra resources. You pay a small stipend, people struggle even in summer, and then you pay for these this year, and the faculty support, and then they need weekly and have projects, so it's documented, but it's not cheap, but it's something I go and advocate for, or for the release and so I know that's a real challenge.
I think the other part of the challenge is we'll have some people who want to do the work and agree to do the work. And then you have people that then come back at the end of August or first of September and say, I didn't have to say.
Well, well, the people I picked, this is my strategy. I mean, they've met every week all summer long. And they got $1,500, so it wasn't as if it was a boom, but it allowed me to at least honor their time a little bit. And it was just 5 people. It was a 4 team. So maybe there's somebody that's a chair of a certain committee, or I mean, I picked the chairs of the various committees to maybe work that. And if it's somebody that was voted the chair of the committee, then it might be less. They can then bring it back and fall for input. It might be a person they've already honored. Or at least my
That's where I think as a group of deans and directors, what are the creative ways that we're going to help facilitate this work?
Yeah, I mean, we have the Education Council serving everyone, every single department, academic and service that has any input into teacher preparation as a representative on that council. And then that serving on the council is considered the substantive service on the workforce. So, so that time is kind of accounted for. But then we have a working group in college education. There's a working group in the work started college learning, and by establishing those working groups as task forces for college, and again, that can go and work with kind of be excused from some other committee work that you have this related to this. So it's not, or at least those people, it's not in addition to the work, it's replacing. But I still know that we're going to have to offer some.
Other topics, other things that are in the back of your mind, you're heavy, you wake up at 1 o'clock because that's just my nightmare of things that are coming up.
I have a question for you, Paula. You had spoken about your summer one-day workshop with teachers, and I was curious if there was a series of follow-up meetings, maybe during the year, in which you would partner, try to regather some of those individuals, knowing that perhaps it didn't always work to bring everyone together, but were there follow-up meetings?
There are follow-up meetings, but they're very small in scale. So we have some regular partners, mostly in elementary schools that we would, and so we would follow up with those groups. We're starting to spread a little bit more of that work into secondary. So I guess the answer to that is a little, but not nearly as much as we would like to. And in part, really, for us, we have our Cape visit coming in a month and a half, like 4 or 5 weeks, and great bands. So all of a sudden, these other things, so we're all of our time and attention. But that would be a whole lot more fun than because the feedback and enthusiasm from people that was, it even startled us that they were that interested in joining, like feeling more of a partner.
When in the summer did you have it? Kind of in June, right after school?
We did. We had it like June 21st or something like that. We had put out a really short survey to like some of our more consistent partners who we know they're going to respond, and we sent it out to about 40 people and said, would you prefer, if we did something like this, would you prefer it at this time, or this? And overwhelmingly get and so it was one in June, there was one in July, and there was one like shortly before this.
Same programming at each one?
Same programming, so which date would you prefer? And we really wanted.
Oh, that was the survey.
Yeah, that was the survey that we put out, right, we only ran one. Yeah. And they only, like, they liked everything about it, they just wanted even more breakout sessions. We didn't have anything specific to special education other than what our program is, so none of the agencies. So they asked for that, and then we had a working lunch, and they said, you know what, that was kind of chat with our volunteers. But otherwise, it was.
Did you say it was piloted with elementary this past year?
We had everybody there.
Elementary and secondary.
Gen, special ed.
And how much of that day is a shared experience among the mentor teachers?
Actually, almost all of it would have been the only sessions that would have been specific, because we had a room about this size with tables, and so some of the tables had elementary or special ed, or they had secondary English, secondary math, and we had our faculty there, and then the operating teachers could come in and just learn a little bit more about what's being taught in the program and what the expectations are throughout, make some suggestions. That was actually, I think, the only one that was specifically, you know, secondary or elementary. Probably the co-teaching session, one of the co-teaching sessions that we had, I guess, to see how elementary people would gravitated for it, because it was a panel, and they were, I think they were all elementary.
Questions that we still want answers to. Let's be on top of the future.
I can go back to the grade banding a little bit. I have been getting questions about maybe pre-K 12, especially for modern language. But like they're just struggling, I think, to maybe that's everybody on that side, but I've been talking more, struggling a little bit to think about what this is going to look like. What they currently, what we're currently doing. I don't know if there are any insights that we have been also maybe worked on, think about that a little bit. Or I can share.
PK is for rules. And now PTS, the birth of.
Right, the PK3, Paul is asking about the things that do have that currently are K-12.
Yeah, so it's just adding one, it's just adding
PK-12.
the 4-year-old, not going from, yes.
Right.
So,
But are those, I think, the way, but that's going to be their certificate, right?
Once we hit this, we're taking this field by field. So when the world language standards are up for review again, which we don't anticipate for another 5 years or more.
So really they're.
Then we would go to, so that some of the decisions to be brought forward in that are, do we continue to have the elementary, secondary, and now PK-12 options? Under the gray band, what does it look like to be elementary? That means PK-3 and 3-6, the secondary being 5-9 and 7-12, so you get sort of 2 grade bands. Or should it be all 4, 5 grade bands available? Like we could do PK-3 Spanish and not do 3. So those are things to determine with that world language standard, so we revise those standards. And then what implications for a peak, for the full span, what needs to be added to cover the PK part of that's not currently covered by the K-12.
but I think the question is, if now we just have a general cert, which is endorsement 6. I love the picture. So now if I can just have a PK-12 world language, now that means I can just teach world language. I don't have an elementary, I don't have, unless I get the dual certificate.
Right, I think that's what they're struggling. So they're I think they're struggling with, so okay, it's not attached to this other initial certificate. It is its own.
So they may choose to do that with, just like those grade band are doing a PK-3, 3-6. We're thinking of it this way, that you could do a PK-3 world language, could be your dual. You know, if you're trying to get 2. And so we've been thinking about the world language is just one of those, here's your menu. You want to get 2 endorsements when you leave. Here are the combinations you can do. I mean, you could do PK-3 in high school, but you're not going to do it easily. But if you want to do it easily, here's the ways you can do it, and one of those would be the PK-12 world language with one of the others. But you don't have to. You could do one by itself, and but then you're just a Spanish teacher, which isn't a just, but that's what you teach, correct?
Right, and one thing that we'll lose once we've got MOEX programmed and the new certificates recommended. What we'll lose is for that K-12 or PK-12 world language, you'll won't have this generic secondary non-content sitting there. Because right now, you could go and just get a world language PK-12 or K-12, but it would be a secondary certificate. So the individual would take whatever largely the professional sequence that corresponds to secondary, because it's a secondary certificate, which means nothing until you put an endorsement on it. Then it's K-12 advantage. Instead of somebody going and saying, did I complete an elementary, so the decision tree when they log in and apply and know it, instead of asking, did you complete an elementary or a secondary program? What program did you complete? What language? What grade base that you covered? K-12 or what? And that's, they just had that certificate, teaching certificate with that on it. So that's one programming change that the certs will look different. But it doesn't mean that their programs right now have to look any different from what they do now for the K-12. They're getting an appropriate professional sequence that is reasonable across, allowing them to teach across the whole spectrum.
But there's no longer a secondary option, there will no longer be just a secondary option?
Once we still have, the way the standards are there's the elementary, secondary, and the K-12 option.
So that's gonna stay, so that's not in the picture?
Until we revise those standards and bring together and decide what's best for the field.
Okay. But right now in the picture, it's just K-12, and the only thing that is.
Right, in the cert structure diagram, it just sits there in the PK-12 area to signal that that's one of the content areas you can get there, but that's not an all-inclusive. Like everything that we certify is not on that diagram. So we don't imagine world language being completely unavailable for grade. Although I will say what we're getting from the field is a more desire for teachers that have that broad all grades authorization in world languages, particularly when they've got a 6-12. Well, we've got some exploratory 5th grade. We need to put them in there. How do we do that if they only have 6-12? And we have teachers who want to expand to get that, because in many districts there's one world language teacher, and they're hopping buildings, and with only an elementary or only a secondary, they're not able to do so.
I feel like it's still sort of so distinction. One distinction that we could maybe make is that if you put the world languages next to special education is K-12, K-12 also, but
and only
right, but it has to come with or on top of one of the other certifications. That's the only way you can pursue special education, which is this.
Right, you have to have a content area there.
Modern languages can be its own.
Yes.
Our special ed looks a bit more wondering because it does say K-12, the Mars regs are K-12.
Yes.
Are Mars regs going to be open for that, or?
I will speak and Leah can tell me yay or nay. We do not anticipate that under current leadership of the Office of Special Education that they would open it up.
Well, it's going to be
Mars has.
And so that question has come up quite a few times so far.
Question connected to Paul's last contribution here around distinguishing special education from music education. bilingual education and ESL also has to be attached to a core area.
Yes, that's right.
And where does it kind of provide the rationale for why like ESL has to be attached to a core? Like, why couldn't it be a standalone PK-12 endorsement?
And yes, you had written to me on that. Yeah, we had that correspondence on it. This was, when we built the standards, we opened that question up with our Office of Field Services, which now sits under broader office. But with our Field Services unit, their Special Populations unit, and what they need are ESL teachers that can support children's mastery of content while they are learning English. And the easiest example is certainly your elementary, right? They're elementary, they've got their core subjects plus the ESL. They didn't want people who were ESL only teachers that can just be in a resource room and only teaching English to those students. They want the ESL teacher to be able to support content area instruction, as distinct from the bilingual teacher who will deliver content area instruction in the language of their specialization. Bilingual Spanish will be teaching content in Spanish, as well as helping those students learn English. The ESL teacher, on the flip side, teaching English, but also supporting the students' content area knowledge. They wanted students to be able to not just sit in a holding pattern in an ESL resource room, learning English and falling behind in content area mastery, and they want them to be progressing in all of this as they go through. So that's the rationale for connecting it to the core. And then for not connecting to other content. Assess the content areas.
It's just a couple minutes before we're supposed to try to get folks back here.
Just 1:30.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
They can do that, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and we do teachers program stuff. The other areas. And so that teacher but we hope that they're outside.
I was trying to capture this discussion because it was really kind of like one of the there wasn't a lot of notes to take, and I'm trying to figure out how to.
Yeah, there are a lot of.
Yeah, it's hard to take notes, listen, and think, because you want to contribute. He's suggesting that the A2 planning goals, there is a follow-up or collaboration, and she's going to provide.
So, yes, there is definitely.
So,
And that's why my question was.
In the synchronous versus asynchronous, you can both are helpful.
Right.
When you have time and space, you do it asynchronous. And maybe you sit down and say, hey, oh, what do you do?
Also,
it'll be fine. So, yeah, you want our new program to come out next year, so give us a natural course. All these things, this will set us up. Because a lot of it is kind of oh yeah, oh, not here. Well, imagine, and fully well know.
I live in that reality.
They say more. Does noise help? So people are going to these. So if I to answer the question. This is your work.
Is everybody back on cert officers?
Yeah. So, we didn't have a lot of discussion last week. Sort of this got those materials.
All right, do we still, is this on?
The button's on top.
All right, welcome back. So we have breakout reports. The certification officers have a presentation, so they're not going to join us for a while. And we are recording that, so anybody out there can take a look at that and put it up on the DARTEP website. After we do this, we have 3 different areas for breakout sessions. We have CAPE, HLP, and MDE will be in a room for questions and answers. So kind of decide amongst yourselves what you want to go to. And when you're done with that, we will adjourn at 2 and have a safe drive home. All right, first up, let's do accreditation. We have a report for that.
We spent the majority of our time talking about the institutions that have visits this spring. There are 5 of us in Michigan that are going through the process, beginning with Hope College in 2 weeks, and I believe concluding with Ferris State at the end of April. Gina suggested that when you write your rejoinder at the conclusion of the process, that you should address all the times when teams were out of compliance, as a matter of fact. For example, if you didn't get your formative feedback report done in the timeline that's been provided by CAPE, you should address that in your rejoinder. The proper timeline, the self-study report is due 9 months before the visit. Formative feedback report, you should be given back to you 5 months before the visit. Your addendum is due 60 days after you receive that. Then you have your visit, and the site report that comes from the visit should be 2 weeks after the visit has been completed, and you have 30 days to write your rejoinder. We discussed the call for comment process that CAPE has us do. If you have any questions about that, contact Vince O'Neill at CAPE. Gina reminds all EPPs to include her with any correspondence between yourself and the team members. Don't do what I did. I have that in there. And then the council meeting was discussed. EPPs need to have a person at that council meeting when the decision is made for accreditation that can answer the questions that the council could potentially have in a very succinct way. You have 20 minutes at that point. There's really no additional information. You are merely someone who can answer the council's questions, and it's important that you find someone who doesn't just go on and on like this report. In-person and phone call pros and cons was discussed as well. And then we also talked about saving individual student work. Kelly had a great comment at the end: use samples to help guide your practice rather than saving it for CAPE purposes. That if you have student samples that can help with program decisions, that's the reason, is to have them, to keep collecting student work. That's what we talked about. Thank you.
All right, deans and directors.
Most of our discussion centered around grade banding and some of the logistics, open questions and so forth. One particular topic that was mentioned off the top was the spring conference at Hope. And specifically the second day, where there'll be some components around that work of grade band planning, et cetera, for elementary. Just quick. Me speaking louder won't really help the people trying to listen here, but. It's working? No. Not sure why that's not working. Might be possible that something, the laptop might have touched something here. That works. Okay, thanks. So Beth was talking about having a follow-up meeting at EMU to that second, based on that second day of planning that will be happening at Hope, and building on the nuts and bolts kind of work that needs to be done to submit things timeline-wise for getting the new programs approved and up and running. So look for that as we think about that possibility as a follow-up for your teams to be able to visit there. Further to that, mention was made of how might an informal, semi-formal opportunity like that differ from work that might be in the webinars or online resources that MD is putting together in that regard. And I guess the conclusion was that synchronous or asynchronous opportunities might be complementary for the work that teams are doing relative to the development of the new secondary cert programming. Other questions came from institutions about how to handle, the fact that 2 of the 4 secondary areas are forthcoming, but not the other 2. How we might meld the work that necessarily has to be done to plan for the middle years and secondary whilst doing these elementary. And we talked about how to support faculty through that work in the summer when they may not be contractually obligated to do such work. And some of the strategies that were identified or shared were stipends and opportunities for representatives of teams to participate and perhaps be compensated or carry that work through the time periods that are not typically financially accommodated. And finally, we looked at questions about, follow-up questions of Paula's presentation component about professional development, the day that she mentioned in her presentation, and follow-up work, and how she may plan on continuing that work with those mentor teachers. Lastly, we talked a little bit more about certificate structure and modern languages and how that needs to be attached to a certificate. And we speculated about how that might look with regard to, is there an elementary, a secondary, a K-12? And that's still an open question. And the final comment related to this was why ESL endorsements have to be added to content areas, and how this contrasts to the bilingual education specialization. So a lot of the questions in summary were about certificate structure. Some were just still open because of things that have not yet been developed, and particularly with respect to secondary and K-12. And that we very much look forward to Hope, because the planning that will be getting done there will allow us to collaborate across our institutions.
Thanks. Student teaching and clinical experience.
Good afternoon. Our group focused, of course, on communication with the people in the field. One of our participants talked about the fact that district HR departments are asking for candidate social security numbers, and it was discussed that this is actually required as of about 3 years ago for rep. And in the notes for this section, there's a link that Kelly was able to provide for us that talks about a code that's now in there for student teachers so that that can be tracked. And after somebody has live scan, their fingerprints done, that if they have this code entered and they get into legal trouble later, that they can then be found and followed up on. We also talked about how different districts are tracking their field placements. So your elementary people, which schools are they going to, what different grade levels, that depth, breadth, diversity type experience. Several of the institutions are using TK20, some are using different spreadsheets like Excel or something else. And we also talked about Chalk and Wire that has a component with a field placement tool in it. Sonia was another program that was discussed, but it sounds like it wasn't favorably thought of at this time. There was a question about the Department of Health and Human Services providing clearance for all field students. So some of the institutions are already doing that. That is a free check that DHHS does. Some school districts are asking, in addition to that, to also have an iChat or some other form of background checks. Other institutions shared out that they too are being asked to provide more background check information. And then finally, we talked about how institutions are ensuring that their cooperating teachers are meeting requirements of maybe the qualities that we're looking for in the mentor teachers. And the districts, the panel pointed out things like they survey the students and the supervisors to get feedback on the mentor teachers. Some of the institutions co-construct a list of qualities and then send those back to the HR director or the principal and say, here's what we're looking for, here's a list of the teachers we've worked with, is this list still good to work from? Some of the institutions do classroom visits if the survey results are showing a particular mentor teacher is not getting favorable reviews, and they might just stop in on one of their school visits and kind of check out what's going on. But surveys appear to be the most common way to do that. That was it. All right, thanks. We have a little bit of time left, and if you want to stay past 2 o'clock, you're able to do that, that's fine. For the CAPE breakout session, room 1040/50, HLP breakout, room 1060 and 260. Let's do 1060 on that one. And MDE Q&A, rooms 218 and 220. So you decide where you want to go, question and answers, and then have a safe drive home. Thank you very much for making it in today. Those of you who had decent roads to be able to do so, and have a good weekend. Thanks.
Thank you everyone for coming to Western.
Western.
Yeah, they want to just stay here. This is
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, if you guys want to just stay in here, do question and answers, Gina's available, and Sarah Kate's over there too. Leah already did her part. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
This might be one of those ones that we locked it together. Okay.
So, what are the?
Yes. Yeah, it's they have to.
And they want it to be. They said that that's what they did.
Yeah, finding a procedure is
So it's either a you or we changed the standards this year. We changed the standards. They So,
So,
we'll see what they say.
I won't be there.
But I was waiting to watch you.
constant spells. I am aware. Hey, this is Epi Representatives.